What is up? Good morning. Happy Scott Fish Day, but it is still mock draft Monday. I am now the host. I'm the captain now, Ryan Weisse. Our guy Evan got a new job. Mondays were not going to work for him anymore. So I said, let me move over to the seat. Let's stop waking Josh Hudson up early. And cordially, my guy Austin had just reached out to one of our new writers and said that he's going to be available to do this show as a special guest every week for the rest of the summer. And I said, well, why not come on and be the co-host every week for the rest of the summer? And he accepted. So without further ado, my new co-host, Austin Amandolia. How are you, buddy?
I'm doing great. Glad to be here. Glad to have a host that can pronounce my name correctly.
Yeah.
That's a big win.
Yeah, Josh, we joked Josh was getting fired because of the amount of names he has butchered over the last month. Austin's being one of them because Austin was our guest on Memorial Day when we did a best ball draft, and Josh called him Evan. Sort of got the last name right, but it is what it is. Austin, just tell the people a little bit about yourself. They probably haven't seen you on a lot of shows.
Yeah, for sure. So I'm Austin Amandolia. You can find me on Twitter and now on Instagram at Austin_FFL. Right now, I'm very much baked into fantasy football content, trying to update all of my rankings for best ball, redraft, dynasty. Make sure that you have those. I do IDP rankings as well, which will be relevant for today's show and will be part of Fantasy Pros Expert Consensus this year. And apart from that, I do some Formula One content, and we can talk about that a little later, but happy to be here and excited to do this IDP draft.
Yeah. Now, as Austin mentioned, IDP is going to matter because I like to switch these drafts up. If this is your first time tuning in, the point of this show was to help people newer to fantasy football to essentially get better and more comfortable with all different types of leagues. This is not going to be a show where I go over everybody's mock draft at the end of the show. I'm going to talk with these gentlemen about their strategy. We're going to point out some interesting things we see in the draft. But with IDP, individual defensive player, if you're not aware, still kind of looked at like a niche, and it really shouldn't be. I wanted to get a draft done, and there are a ton of great IDP sites, but if you think IDP, you think IDP guys, and who better than the founder, my friend Nate, to come on the show and do an IDP draft with us. Nate, thank you so much for coming on.
Yeah, Ryan, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to get into this mock draft and to share this hour with you guys.
Well, we're absolutely glad to have you. So we are running this as a single quarterback, 0.5 PPR, 10-team league. So this is probably very similar to the league you're running with all of your work friends or family friends, things like that. But with the caveat being we added 3 IDP slots. And we're going to talk a little bit more about this later, but it's 1 defensive lineman, 1 linebacker, and 1 DB. And so we're going to really focus in the draft strategy about that. So I'm going to first go ahead and get the draft started. You can see it up on the screen now. Our buddy Nate actually took the first pick, so that's going to keep everything very simple for us. And I'm going to click start draft. And this is one of the first weeks where I can assure you the first pick is not going to time out because sometimes Sleeper forgets to tell people that they're up with the first pick. So while Nate's figuring out the first pick, I just wanted to go ahead and say, IDP guys, I'm in a very big IDP league right now, 32 team, full offense, full defense. And we had our rookie draft this week. And IDP guys was the site that I used to get some of the mixed draft boards, which I think is an absolutely awesome tool because there are leagues out there where you don't know how to weigh offense versus defense. And IDP guys makes that very accessible to us. So Nate, if you could start us off, how did you get started in IDP? How long have you been playing? And how did that lead to your creation of idpguys.org?
Yeah. Oh, man. So I've been playing IDP for as long as I've been playing fantasy football. In total Bane voice, many of you guys adopted IDP. I was born into it. It was about 2008. My good friend, Johnny the Greek, many people know him off of Twitter.
Yeah.
We were best friends, and he invited me to go watch some football at our mutual friend's place. And I wasn't really a football fan. And it kind of hooked me where I, saw the, oh no, someone timed out.
Second pick of the draft, 50 Shades of Drunk. He probably didn't get the notification though. Sleeper's been pretty bad about that, but I digress.
Yeah. So it hooked me into football. Seeing the drinking, the fantasy, watching. We had 3-4 TVs going. The whole like command center type look.
Yeah.
And I was completely hooked into it, and I got into, because of him, fantasy football and football. Totally. And so that just kind of, I played in. I created my own league. Starting off, and that thing's been running now for 10 something years, which is pretty awesome. But that just kind of transitioned after a few years. Johnny and I became roommates. We always would talk about that league and talk about, fantasy football whenever we got together. And so we just kind of decided, why don't we try podcasting? Let's, there's not a whole lot of content out there for IDP. And so it started as a podcast. We did one season just solely, recording ourselves, putting it out there. And then the next year we decided we were seeing some success. So we started a website, and I've got a background in journalism, graphic design, web design, all that stuff. So it just made sense. And that, those wild West days of IDP, there wasn't much out there to go by. So we were just trying to fill a need. And 5 years later, here we are.
I absolutely love it. And I always tell the story. I've been dabbling in IDP, certainly not to the extent of you, but I've been dabbling in IDP for years. And I remember playing in a league on, I don't even remember what the damn name of the site is anymore, but I remember playing in a league where we started like 9 IDP. Injury reports for defensive players were hard to come by. I'm talking like 2008, 2009, where I was starting guys that I didn't even know were hurt, but at least now they're finally being shown the respect that you're seeing from the offensive players. Austin, how long have you been playing IDP?
So this year will actually be my first year playing IDP. I've been doing rankings for the past year, and I'm a stats guy. So I've been following the stats, and I have all sorts of reports on IDP players that have helped me get educated over the past year. And then I obviously follow awesome folks on Twitter like Nate that can give me all the strategy advice and help me, translate some of those stats to actually setting a lineup.
And I love that. And I love the fact that, this is your first year in it. And Nate, that kind of brings me back over to you. You started IDP guys 5 years ago. You've been playing IDP for a while. But what I really like is, instead of kind of like hoarding it, first and foremost, you guys have so many great writers, and I love that your Twitter handle says, we do offense as well, but not just from the starting of a website. And you're kind of the first website founder outside of Josh, but we don't count him, that we've had on the show. But what I really absolutely love about you is that you've taken that creation spirit and you've passed it around the community. You started off, I think, about 2 years ago, where I noticed you were doing really great threads about getting started in this industry and just ways to gather engagement. And you've taken that to a whole nother level. And it's something I've had the pleasure of talking to you about in private. But I'd like for you to share with our audience just kind of, your thoughts on growing in this community and what you're doing to help.
Yeah, absolutely. Everything that I have done, I've had to kind of figure it out myself or take college courses about it. There's not a whole lot of resources out there regarding, how to start a website, how to get into content creating, how to do YouTube channel. I mean, like, you can go into, plenty of videos on YouTube and piece them all together and spend hours and days trying to, figure out best practices. But I'm developing and launching here, hopefully by the end of the summer. The website's all done, but it's just getting the final details together. It's called Content Design Coach. And anyone watching the Podathon yesterday, I sponsored a few segments and had some good conversations spurred because of that regarding, Content Design Coach and getting people. Let me just real quick make my picks.
Yeah, go ahead and make your picks. Ooh. If you're not in Scott Fishbowl, you may wonder what he's talking about with the Podathon. The folks over at Trophy Smack sponsored, I think it ended up being 35 hours with Sal Leto, just kind of running this entire thing, where they invited a ton of people to talk about Scott Fish Bowl strategy, Scott Fish Bowl donations. It's very important what Scott's doing for the community over there with charity and donations. If you're not familiar with Scott Fish Bowl, I recommend you go to scottfishbowl.com. You can get signed up for next year's draft today. This year's draft just started today, so you're a little out of the loop, but donate right now, because I think all the funds are still going to Toys for Tots, but if not, they go to very different causes in different cities that are all fantastic. So Nate, I was just kind of covering some time there, but please keep going.
Thank you. Yeah, absolutely. So, generally speaking, it's this creating resources where people who are looking to break into the industry, finding the skills they need to it's kind of whatever level you want. So if you want to just be able to produce good content, have a solid group of friends on Twitter and stuff that you get together and do things like this, shows and mock drafts and stuff, learning the skills to be able to produce that stuff. Or if you are really ambitious and you want to get to ESPN level and above, I help you get to those points through, resources and learning new skills to make yourself more attractive to those employers, essentially.
Yeah.
And so, part of that is there's a podcast that's coming out. I've had 5 amazing guests where we sit down Joe Rogan style, and I just pick their brains for an hour to 2 hours and just pull out all of this really great information. Guys like Ken Moody, I just had from one of the founders of DLF that put together their website and has been managing that site for, I think he said 15 years, and scaling it to the point that they just sold to BetSperts. Jeff Risdon, he's managed 3 different USA Today wire sites in the sports industry, and he gave amazing insight into looking at what are these guys, what are employers looking for, what makes you employable, what are the skills you need. So just talking to people in my network that I've grown to have, as friends over the past, really, it's been 10 years that I've been in the sports industry. So taking all of that, compacting it into something that is consumable and, kind of having it there for people to take advantage of it.
What a wonderful way of just kind of describing it, because there's something I wanted to point out, and these aren't your success stories yet because you're just getting started. But for folks who listen to what Nate just said, and it could start off as simple as you wanting to do just a small podcast of you and your friends talking about fantasy football. If you don't think you can get big off of that, you're absolutely wrong. Probably the most famous people in our industry, the fantasy footballers, started off with a podcast where they were just talking about their own league. Mm-hmm. And then they realized that they were more entertaining than they could have ever imagined. I mean, I don't know if they realized that, but it became just this enormous thing. And you mentioned Ken Moody. No relation. Eric Moody was a guy who started with his very own content and is now working for ESPN. So partnering yourself with somebody like Nate, who knows what they're doing in this industry, who's going to help you grow your content, grow your subscribers, grow your activity and your creation. I don't know what I'm trying to say here, but the long and short of it is getting with a mentor who knows what the hell he's doing can take you to heights that you probably never thought you could imagine, because that's what if you go with no direction, you have no idea where you're going, but Nate can get you a direction. So Nate, where can they start following, and can they yet start following the content you're going to be creating for this type of league before we jump back, or for this type of creator help before we jump back into the draft?
So definitely follow me at Nate Cheat on Twitter, but go to YouTube and search Content Design Coach. And my YouTube channel is up there. There's a bunch of trailers for the conversations I've already had. But once it kicks off, it'll be at contentdesigncoach.com. I'm going to have, resources like full courses that'll take you from start to finish on how to launch a website. And but if you're following me, you'll definitely see the notifications and everything. You can even DM me your email and I'll put it inside. I've got a MailChimp marketing set up so that I can add your email to that list. But let me get some players in here.
Yeah, you're up. I just dropped the content design coach link kind of on the chat. So you'll see it in the chat, and I'll try to make sure I get it linked into the description of this video. So while Nate's making his picks, Austin, I want to take a look at what we've had go off the board already. And man, do we need to talk IDP, but I want to actually start with your team because you started with one of my favorite strategies, which is getting an elite tight end. And you've went very balanced to this point. So Naji Harris in the first round, Kyle Pitts in the second round, a couple of second-year guys. And then I just noticed Jalen Waddle in the third round. So you're really in on the second-year players right now.
Yeah, I mean, first off, Naji Harris, I said this in my recent article on him. I think he has the upside to be the RB1 this year. Kyle Pitts should take a big step forward. So I definitely like these three guys to take a step forward in their second year. And I think with there being so many different ways to attack this draft, since we've added 3 new positions, I am looking to get a nice solid kind of foundation for my offensive skill position players, because I know I'm going to have to start pivoting towards those IDP players in the next few rounds. And so I wanted to just have a nice foundation and some guys that I feel really confident in at those positions. And then I can start worrying about balancing my roster out elsewhere later on. So I'm going to make my pick now.
That's perfect. And you hit on a very good point, and I'm going to kick it over to Nate because we're getting into something interesting that I didn't think we'd be talking about yet. So you said with adding those extra positions, it's kind of giving you some flexibility and some leeway earlier. IDPs went hella early, and that is not my experience. Nate, you and I happen to be in a mock draft right now with, and this is no offense to anybody drafting with us, but you and I are drafting with 12 folks who are IDP analysts. And while I'm not an IDP analyst by any stretch, I have a trophy that says I know how to play this damn game. And so they invited me to the draft. I know there are some sharps in this draft. 50 Shades of Drunk does IDP content. That's actually his Twitter handle at 50 Shades of Drunk. So check him out. I know he's a big IDP content guy. I don't know if anybody else in the draft is, and I don't know how new they are, but to see TJ Watt, my apologies, TJ Watt go off in the third round was a joke we were actually making in the Club Fantasy group chat this morning. And now it actually happened. And not to mention, this gentleman also double tapped IDP with Micah Parsons coming back around in the fourth round. Nate, what are your thoughts? Let's just say, Nate, I think you're pretty familiar with the fantasy and frame scoring matrix where TJ Watt is a cheat code. He is a Travis Kelce type. Is the third round too early, and is double tapping this early advisable?
So what I would say is, know your league, know your league mates, because if you're in with sharks and they're all going to wait until the 7th round and that, there's no reason to take it so early. But if you know that some of your guys might pull the trigger early, those kind of things, it's not necessarily advisable. But I can see the strategy there if you really want those guys. And you don't want your teammate to get them. So in this situation where we have one at each position, I wouldn't double tap, the same position like that. But honestly, so like you see, I took Myles Garrett there in the 4th, mainly because I knew that being on the end, I'll have to wait all the way till the end of the 6th to, even get anything. And Myles Garrett is my dude. I love that guy, except for when he gets really angry on the field. And so, I wanted to make sure I got him, and seeing the kind of run on IDP, I took him there. And as you can see, it was probably a good thing because Mace, Callie King, 49er 17 there, took Nick Bosa. He probably would have got Mike Garrett before he came back around. And, 50 Shades of Drunk there took the first quarterback off the board. And I was thinking with my double, the turn right there, I was like, I'm going to do, an IDP and then get a quarterback. And with Mahomes, right there, I felt pretty confident. in him, kind of bouncing back. I was going between him and Herbert. I do like Herbert, but I think that Mahomes coming back is going to be more valuable.
And that's something we've talked about on this show quite a bit. And Austin, you did the best ball draft with us last time, but where the quarterback should fall. And right now, we're all going to say this quarterback ADP looks really good. The first quarterback didn't go to the 4th round. The right 4 guys went as the first 4 picks. Everything looks good. Where we end up changing our mind is always the 10th, 11th, 12th round, when we start seeing Tom Brady and Aaron Rodgers and these guys fall that far. And we're like, oh, we probably could have waited on quarterback. In the defense of, whose name is this? In the defense of King James, probably a LeBron fan. I'm from the Cleveland area, so go Cavs. In the defense of King James, so I want to talk a little bit about the structure of this league. I set it up as 1 defensive lineman, 1 linebacker, 1 DB. And this is not your typical IDP league. When you jump into an IDP league, there's going to be way more positions. But this is maybe how a beginner would start. And in the defense of taking Parsons and TJ Watt, they both are kind of a cheat code on Sleeper in that they can also be put in their defensive line spot. So it's pretty interesting to grab both of them. It's not something you'll normally see where a guy gets both of them, but he went early and he got his guy. So it's going to be an interesting concept. But that's just, we'll talk more about IDP in a bit. Austin, how are your thoughts right now, early on 10-team draft, about how the quarterbacks are coming off the board?
Yeah, I think the quarterbacks are exactly where they should be coming off, which is also really great because for a little inside baseball, the ADP settings when using IDP really mess up where the quarterbacks are ranked. And so right now it looks like you should be drafting all sorts of quarterbacks, but everybody's been really patient, and kudos to the drafters for that. I think this is appropriate. It's going to be interesting to see how things shake out in rounds 6 through 10 because people are going to start filling out kind of their base positions, and that quarterback slot's going to be opening up soon. And so it's going to, I think we'll probably see a quarterback run happen probably in the 8th or 9th round, if not later. And it's going to be about getting your guy during that run so you don't miss the next quarterback run.
Exactly. And then Nate, you and I talked a little bit before the show. I added IDP to my home league. What was it, about 10 years ago now? And they fought me on it. And what we ended up adding was just an IDP flex spot. So one single guy, it's a dice roll, and everybody ends up starting linebacker every week because it's a very basic scoring format. With this draft, I wanted to do something a little bit differently, which is why I went 1 D-line, 1 linebacker, 1 DB to kind of show some diversity. So for someone looking to get started and maybe talking their league into doing IDP, is there a way you would recommend kind of pitching that to your league just to get people to dip their toes when it comes to, I guess, A, scoring, and B, roster spots?
Yeah, so I mean, the big thing about adding IDP is that you expand your football knowledge based off of, like, think about it. You know, if you're only playing offense, you know so much about the offense. And once the offense is off the field, you're looking around at players you have no idea about. You know, maybe because of like a wide receiver article that pairs with a cornerback, you might know some cornerbacks on the field. But for the most part, like, you're missing half the game. And I feel like it's a natural progression in fantasy football to get more and more into the sport because you always want to have that edge to, you know, become the winner of your league and, you know, become more and more of a degenerate. And so that's kind of how I pitch IDP is like, hey, you know, all of these players, like, everyone loves the big defensive hits. You know, you love those pick sixes, those big plays and all that kind of stuff. So it's like, why not, you know, play it and learn more and get into a position where, you know, no matter what's going on the field, you feel like you have a chance to score in your league. So adding IDP, you know, is extremely important for me in leagues that I'm in. But on the flip side, you know, you mentioned having one singular IDP in your league.
Yeah,
that's like having one singular offense of players in your league. You know, like, you're trying to, what would you do in that situation? You'd start a quarterback every single week. Like,
yeah,
there's no one else that would score more than that. and the depth of that, so you're in a draft where you only need one offensive player. Like, you probably wouldn't even draft somebody. If I was in your league with that one
I don't.
singular IDP, I wouldn't draft anybody. I'd pick up someone off the waiver wire because the top 12 total IDP probably score pretty close to the same. So unless someone's over there hoarding IDP on their bench, you're just stream it, swap through, and treat it like a kicker.
Yeah.
So what I really recommend, and I would even go the next step from what you've got set up here. I think a minimum, if you really want to be serious about it, 2 at each position, so that you have 6 total IDP. That would be kind of like if we were going to have like a beginner setup, and then try and utilize a scoring system that creates some level of balance, so that your offense isn't scoring 200 points and your IDPs are scoring 10. You do want it to have some weight. We have a pretty great article on IDP guys that goes through all the different types of scoring systems out there. I personally am not a subscriber to having just one scoring setting and everyone should use it. I think it should be based off of your offense, based off of how you want to play the game. Scoring set system for 6 IDP versus a scoring system for a full 11-man IDP roster. Those two systems don't need to be the same thing. And so that is kind of my mentality and how I pitch it to people to add in IDP.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. I think one of the keys you've hit on is making sure you're balancing your defensive scoring and your offensive scoring. Otherwise, it's a complete waste and they just end up being boring. Austin, you actually mentioned your league is adding IDP this year, and you actually went with this exact setup of defensive line, linebacker, DB. So you're at least forcing some diversity on your league.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good way to go, because then you really get to immerse yourself in IDP, which I think is why we made that decision. We had debated on whether or not to do just one position or not, but we wanted to kind of force our league to like really test out the idea and get a sense of if we were going to like this or not, and maybe expand it in the future. So I'm really happy we did it. I'm also really happy we did it because it's easy. There are ways that you can kind of think of some of these IDP positions similarly to some of the offensive positions in terms of the amount of depth and whatnot. And so there's a bit of translation that can
make
occur
your pick.
there.
Don't stumble over your pick here. But no, that's a really great point. When I did an IDP show a couple weeks ago or a week ago to talk about the mock that Nate and I are in together, and there was a lot of comparison to how you look, and it's 3 of each position. So the linebackers are sort of like your wide receivers in a PPR with the tackles. They're going to catch all the balls, so you look at them that way. The defensive linemen, you're going to be getting a lot of sacks, hopefully, which kind of equate to touchdowns. So you could kind of look at them as like the elite tight ends and the tight ends, where there are a lot of really good defensive linemen if it's a sack-heavy league, but there's a lot of not really good defensive linemen as well. And then corners are always the one where I find you have to be very nuanced in your scoring. Corners and DBs can get left behind if you don't pay a lot of attention to how you do your scoring matrix. So I want to take a look at one person's team, because I think because of IDP, he's been able to have a very interesting strategy to this point. And that is the guy we've been talking about, 50 Shades of Drunk. He went very much 0 RB, 7 picks before he added his first RB. Regardless of how you feel about Cam Akers and Josh Jacobs, they are both starting running backs in the NFL that he was able to land in the 7th round after stacking his wide receiver core, getting the QB1, getting a top tight end. Is that something you guys find? And I'll start with you, Austin. I know, actually, I'm going to start with Nate. No offense, Austin, but you said this is kind of your first year playing IDP. Is that something you tend to find is there ends up being more value in some offensive players because people are focusing on taking IDP earlier in the draft?
Absolutely. That's the great thing about the strategy when you add in IDP is you elongate your draft. So, when the shift happens to IDP, all of those offensive players that would be taken aren't being taken anymore. So you get more value dropping in the draft. I mean, I probably would not, as you can see, I went RB. So for me, it's more of just wanting to make sure I didn't, screw up my draft, having Jonathan Taylor, and then Nick Chubb just kind of jumped out at me for, my second running back there. But, if you feel confident that you can get those RBs late, I have no problem going, wide receiver early and often, and then mixing in the IDP when it becomes relevant. So it's a solid draft strategy there for sure.
Yeah, Austin, I want to take you over to one of our co-writers, Joe Pepe over here. Started off with 3 running backs, but more importantly, he grabbed Alvin Kamara as his 3rd running back. And I've recently been pushing back about a lot of the Saints ADP to begin with. But Kamara specifically, because he is facing this 6-game suspension, but there's nothing guaranteed with that yet. So I don't know that I'm comfortable with Kamara as my RB2. I'm certainly not comfortable with him as my RB1, but landing him as the RB3 and starting off with 3 running backs in a position where you kind of don't have a lot of depth. How do you feel about Kamara in this situation?
I think that's where he should be going. I wouldn't feel comfortable taking him as my RB2 either. And I think particularly since this is redraft, it makes a lot of sense to load up there, because worst case scenario, you can trade away one of those players for a position you're weak at later on in the season. Let's say his first 2 running backs are killing it through 6 games, and then Kamara comes back and starts. You can trade off Kamara to a team that's struggling and trying to make their way back up the standings. So I think it's a good strategy. And like y'all were just talking about, because of the IDP thrown in here, you can still get skill position players at later rounds and not have to stress as much about getting an elite receiver in those first 3 rounds. I mean, Joe was able to get Hollywood Brown and Mike Williams, and I think it was that,
and even
Darnell
Mooney 2 rounds later. Yeah,
that's like incredible value here. And he did it without really sacrificing any position. He's yet to take a tight end, which he is kind of known for, but I think that's a fine strategy here as well.
As long as he doesn't take Cole Kmet, but we'll get to that when we have to. Nate, I want to actually get your opinion after you make your pick here on Aaron Donald. Austin actually grabbed him in the 8th round. Aaron Donald, widely regarded as the best defensive player in the NFL, arguably the best defensive player maybe of this like current generation of players. But defensive tackles don't have the best reputation in defensive line leagues where you don't have to start specific defensive tackles. Now, I know a ton of scoring is going to determine whether or not Aaron Donald is a viable option in your league, or does it? Is Aaron Donald somebody who transcends the defensive tackle position? So what I would ask you is, can you kind of explain to folks where the kind of like negative outcome of a defensive tackle in a defensive line league instead of a DT league, where that comes from, and does Aaron Donald transcend the badness of defensive tackle?
So defensive tackles generally don't get a lot of tackles or sacks. They're in the middle of the line, and usually that's like the most protected part of on the offensive line. And so it's very difficult, when you separate them out from the defensive line, you create the value for that position, because you have to pick a defensive tackle. And that's when you get into Solomon Thomas's, Quinnen Williams, and those kind of guys. The problem is when you lump them in with defensive ends that are getting sacks and tons of tackles from coming off of the edge, the value just really drops. But Aaron Donald is such a beast. I mean, this man literally practices with knives to just, get really good at murdering opposing quarterbacks. So in a defensive line league, he does have value because he is getting tackles, he is getting in and getting sacks. But it kind of softens that value so that, I mean, he might have been taken a little bit high in this draft. I would still kind of put him up in the top, 5 to 8 of defensive ends in a defensive, line league.
Yeah, and most folks, it looks like, are really starting to fill out their defensive rosters. Austin, right now, you actually, yeah, you've hit your 3, but right before you, Joel just took his first IDP and he went defensive line, Max Crosby, who I believe in kind of the standard scoring. And I use standard scoring loosely. Fantasy data is where I get all of my statistics. So they're my standard scoring, even though they don't actually show their scoring matrix. But that's a whole nother problem for a whole nother day. But he got Max Crosby, who I believe was a top 5, top 7 defensive lineman. And I guess that kind of lends itself to this. And maybe that's kind of a thing to kind of be an ambassador to IDP is you're still able to get really talented guys later in the draft. And I think that means everybody's going to have more fun. Do you see that, or was that a part of the decision for adding the 3 positions to your league? And how many teams, I guess, are in your league?
Yeah, we have an 8-team league. So there's going to be plenty of
lots of talent,
lots of talent available, which it actually creates its own challenge, because instead of choosing between like you end up choosing between players in the same tier who you want to start from week to week. And so it's like, okay, is Tyreek Hill or Devontae Adams going to have the better week?
Yeah,
I don't know.
It adds its own challenges. I am not a league shamer at all. 8-team would be hard for me to play in right now unless there were a ton of starting roster spots. I want those decisions. But I do like what you said, that if you can only start 3 wide receivers and you end up with Keenan Allen, Devontae Adams, Tyreek Hill, and I was going to say Jalen Waddle, but they play for the same team. But we'll just say that 4 really good wide receivers, and you can only start 3 of them. That's a similar challenge to, do I start Jacoby Myers or Garrett Wilson this week?
Yeah, exactly. But as far as the thinking behind the 3 positions, it wasn't as much thinking through the depth of the positions, but just the fact that we have folks in our league. We have a variation of backgrounds in our league. And so some folks were defensive backs in college or have played football. And so they just know what to look for on the defensive side a lot more. And then some of us didn't even really watch football before we started playing fantasy football and really got in, learned about how to play fantasy football through stats and projections. And then over time, adapted to other aspects of the game. So really trying to create a balanced environment where both of those types of players can thrive.
Yeah, I absolutely love that. Nate, if you don't mind my asking, and I get a lot of my rankings and things from IDP guys, where do you go for fantasy IDP stats? Do you have go-to sites where you're pulling some of your stats from? Anything that we think people should be looking into?
Pulling stats, I would probably say, like you mentioned, fantasy data. I'll go through there. I use a lot of the data from the league sites, going through MFL, stuff like that.
That's a great point, and we'll talk about that here in a second, but I love that. Keep going.
And as for rankings and stuff, I actually am a user of our content. It's what I go to. I'll ask
absolutely,
my guys, they're the smart ones. Really, when it comes down to it, I'm the guy in the chair. I make it all happen, but they're the smart analysts. So I don't try and pretend to be able to do what they do. Johnny, my best friend, who I started with this, is probably one of the smartest football minds that I know. And he does 20-something, 30-something leagues, and he's always on it in all of them. And I just don't understand. I don't know how you can do it. He's like, oh, I just use the force. I've got my gut, and he wins. He has to be above average in his winning percentage. It's amazing.
And that's awesome. And like I said, one of my big bones to pick, and I don't like to talk bad about websites because I use fantasy data for a lot. I don't like that they don't make the scoring matrix known. They give you these IDP scores, but they don't tell you anywhere. And I've searched high and low, and I've sent emails about how they're calculating it. In offense, and I agree with you, Nate, where there shouldn't be a standard scoring, but I should at least be able to know why you said this guy had 100 points last year, because then I can kind of translate that to my league a little bit easier if it's a sack heavy scoring, if it's a tackle heavy scoring. And so that's kind of one of my issues is I just feel like we're still on the precipice of IDP becoming more mainstream. And some of the sites that are so focused on offense only could do a lot to kind of help us get over the edge, if you will.
So one of the things,
go ahead, please.
If you don't mind me just interjecting, one of the tools that we created last year, and right now I will admit we're in like a little bit of a stall of updating it because we have some really cool things coming in the works. It's just a matter of, we had some finalizing some details, but we created a scoring tool last year, which integrated IDP and offense and pulled in data, projections for the future, data from last year, and you can actually input your own scoring, and it would shuffle
Awesome.
the rankings based off the projections or the data from the previous year. It's on IDP, guys. You can access it with a subscription right now. The only issue is it's a little bit dated because we're trying to get automated data from a scoring provider in through an API, and that just involves some development that we have in the works. It's ready to go. We're waiting on the funds to come through, but this is one of the things that we're hoping to help push IDP into the future with, is being able to customize rankings.
I absolutely love that. And folks, we didn't even plan that. That's just me walking right into a plug for IDP, guys. So definitely something worth checking out if you're playing IDP, because scoring matrices are so wildly different and can really change the value of certain players. As we're coming to the last round here, we're going to give Nate and Austin a time to talk about their entire team. I find it very interesting. This draft really went like you guys all knew what you were doing. We had some IDPs come a little earlier off the board, but overall, how do you, Austin, I'm going to let you talk about your entire draft here in a second, but how do you feel just about, because you started off, as I mentioned, very diverse, and you kind of kept that going, but you waited very long on third running back. How do you feel about your running back room right now?
Yeah, my running back room, I'm like here trying to find a running back that I actually like to take.
Of
a
course,
dart
you're
throw
on the clock as I'm saying this. We can just wait because you're going to talk about your whole team here. Okay, you got it. Great pick.
You're great. So I think I kind of went hero RB here, which I'm a little bit nervous about. I don't necessarily love that strategy for myself because I like to have a lot of depth, but it's redraft, so you're going to be able to work the waivers. You're going to be able to work trades, and I have a couple of spots where I have a lot of positional advantage between tight end and defensive line. So I feel like if I were to play this out and let's say Naji Harris or David Montgomery go down, I would be able to make some moves to adapt for that. So the running back position got a little tough here because it was, trying to fill out more positions, but overall, I feel really good about my two starters. They both have RB1 upside. So as long as they're healthy,
I say let's save that for a second, because I do want to get to one user question before I have you guys break down your strategy. And I guess it's not really a question, it's just a user opinion. Our buddy Omar did not enjoy Max Crosby going before Denzel Perriman. And the one thing I would point out is Perriman is a linebacker in this scoring, and in defense. Crosby is a defensive lineman, so that could have just been a position need, this, that, and the other. But in fear of giving away something I've noticed, Denzel Perriman, so when you pick IDP, ADP, or IDP settings through Sleeper, they still do not give them respectable scores. Like the top IDP is projected to score 24 fantasy points or something like that. So while I appreciate what Sleeper has done by adding this and doing it, we can do more because it doesn't make a ton of sense, but at least we get ADP. For whatever reason, Denzel Perriman, and I don't have it up right now, I believe he was the number 7 linebacker last year. His ADP is rock bottom. I discovered it in the mock I'm doing with Nate in another league. I think Denzel Perriman on Sleeper formats borderlines cheat code if you believe he can repeat what he did last year. So I guess, Nate, I think you're probably looking it up for me right now. What are your thoughts? Because again, I guess it's hard to compare because it's a D lineman versus a linebacker. But do we think Denzel Perriman is a sleeper? Do we think he's not going to be able to repeat what he did last year? I guess, do you have thoughts on Denzel Perriman? And I'm kind of putting you on the spot with that one. So,
yeah. So, like I said, I am not the analyst. I'm more the guy in the chair.
And that's
but
fair.
looking at the information that we collect. So IDP guys, we collect ADP ourselves. We pull together people from Twitter, our analysts. We try and break the bubble as much as we can, so it's not just the same people putting out the same stuff. And throughout the month, we do multiple mock drafts through Sleeper. So definitely, if you're interested in becoming a subscriber, you can get access to that stuff, and it's a great tool to use instead of the Sleeper ADP. Just pull it up on your screen as you're doing your draft.
Yeah.
But right now, in our latest ADP to come out, Denzel Perryman was the LB 43, and I think he's being forgotten about. So if you want to talk about Sleeper, that is definitely the case of a potential sleeper, because I want to flip over to, and now this is Dynasty, so it's a little bit different than your redraft. But I just want to flip over real quick to the rankings and see where he is.
While you're doing that, I just quickly popped over to fantasy data. He was the linebacker 12 last year.
Yeah. Right. And so, for some of the guys, Perryman is a little bit all over the place, but in the our combined consensus dynasty rankings, Perryman is still much higher than the 43. I don't have a exact
you're
number.
fine, but way higher than 43.
Right. So this is one of the things that you can really do for yourself when you're preparing for a draft is look at the ADP and look at the rankings and find out the differences. And that's some of the content we've been putting out at IDP, guys, is we've got Mace, Cali King there, 49er, putting together articles where he looks at both and says, hey, something's not checking out here. So definitely give his articles.
My apologies. I did not know that was his handle. I've seen Mace's content, so my apologies. So when I said I was talking about the people who do IDP content, Mace clearly knows what he's doing. So I very much appreciate you pointing that out there. That's someone else you can follow for IDP info. So Omar, you may have just discovered a cheat code, and you've probably helped some of my league mates that I'm drafting against in a week from now. But Denzel Perryman is very broken on sleeper ADP right now. And he is a guy, I've talked about this strategy before. When I draft, I try to go find the broken guys, the guys who are way down in ADP. And those are the guys I put in my queue, so I don't forget about them later in the draft. So as we do at the end of the show, we're going to start with our guest. Nate, just kind of walk me through your draft. You don't necessarily have to go player by player, but did you have a strategy? Did it play out the way you thought it was going to play out? And kind of, are you happy with what happened in this draft?
Mm-hmm. So my strategy was to not screw up the first pick and take the draft as it came to me. I will say that I made a couple errors. Taking Joey Bosa where I did was mainly because, I was kind of talking and I saw him, and he's got that dual eligibility, which is really awesome. It creates value. But I had forgotten that I took Myles Garrett.
I was just going to ask about that. Okay.
So as a linebacker, Bosa has like very little value. And that's why you saw like I had to then take Wagner with the next pick. So I kind of like messed myself up. Really what I needed to have done, I got sniped by 50 Shades of Drunk for Jeremy Chin. Jeremy Chin would have been the good pick at the Bosa spot because of the fact that dual eligibility. But what it does create is I have a lot of movement for bye weeks. So I won't have to go into the waiver wire, and I'll have top guys for when Wagner goes on bye. I can slot in Bosa. For my flex position, I kind of went with trying to figure out who will be the top wide receiver out of the rookies. I got myself Drake London, and then Treylon Burks, and then a nice lion there, Jameson Williams. I don't necessarily think he was a good pick for redraft, but he will be returning kicks from what I understand. So he could
I read that too.
Be a late year sleeper. I don't want to call him a sleeper. He's really not, but he could become relevant later in the year. And then I got Rashad White there, just kind of filling out.
So you loaded up on the rookies at the end there.
Yeah, just trying to see, who's it gonna be? Who can I grab that might be either the fill-in for a bye week, be the the flex starter. But outside of that, I got some of my favorite guys on IDP between Myles Garrett, Budda Baker. Love that guy. He's always very consistent. And Bobby Wagner switching over to the Rams. I think that he's going to have a good year this year.
Perfect. Austin, same story. Like I said, you don't have to run through every pick unless you really want to. But for the most part, did you have a strategy? Did it go the way you thought you did? And how do you feel about your team? We talked about your running backs a little bit.
Yeah. So I picked the 106 because I wanted to see what it was going to be like to be a bit in this no man's land where, when you're on the ends, it's get your guy territory. And because of that, I frequently did not like the options I had at ADP when they came to me. And so this was a really tricky draft. And it's why I felt like I reached on some players for example, Hunter Renfrow in the little sleeper ADP mock draft. It like says like, oh, you should pick him at like round 9 or something like that. And I was like, you know what? I'm just going to pick him because I feel way better about him than taking a dart throw on a rookie or a second year receiver that hit for like just half the season. And that kind of ended up influencing the rest of my draft. That's why I took Aaron Donald a little bit early, because I felt like there was about to be a significant drop off going on at defensive line. And then I love the value on Jalen Hurts, getting him in the 11th round. Like that is kind of the beauty that IDP presented to me. And I'm not a big Jalen Hurts guy in general. I'm a little bit like iffy on how I think he's going to do this season, but he has the rushing upside, and to get a rushing dominant quarterback in the 11th round of a redraft mock draft is incredible value. So I feel like it turned out pretty well. I feel good about my defensive players. And yeah, I mean, I would be happy if I were coming out like this. Dameon Pierce in the 15th. I mean, it's the 15th round. And so it's
a great pick. I was actually going to highlight that one for you.
Yeah, I think it's funny. I think he's getting slept on amongst the rookie running backs because he doesn't have the name like a Bryce Hall. But whenever the NFL draft was happening, people were saying like, oh, Bryce Hall needs to go to the Houston Texans because there's a clear role opened up for them. And so then they drafted a running back, and everybody's like, oh, nah, he's just going to, be another running back for the Texans. It's like, okay, well, why not? The value could be there.
And just looking at your team, you pointed out two things that IDP, ADP kind of changed up for us. And I don't necessarily mean sleepers ADP. I just mean how things shook out. Jalen Hurts in the 11th round is an enormous value. And we talked about that where, you had your guys who took your quarterbacks in the 4th round. And if they knew they could get Hurts and even Dak Prescott this late in the draft, maybe they don't go quarterback that early. But one that I found interesting is Allen Robinson is a guy I absolutely adore in fantasy this year. In a standard league, his ADP is creeping up into the 5th round, and you were able to land him in the 9th. So that really shows you where things kind of change in IDP format. And especially at the wide receiver position that is so deep, it's probably best to do what Nate and Austin did and at least get your 2 top running backs relatively early in the draft. Nate, did any other players, just draft picks, ADP, good or bad, stand out to you that you caught during the draft? I know you were drafting and talking, so maybe not, but if anybody jumped out, feel free to talk about it.
Well, I was actually just looking at Bryce Hall as you were talking about the running backs and him, and seeing him go in the 3rd round. It's I don't want to call it interesting in a bad way. I think that's a good spot for him, and but it was just kind of something. He's going in above your Aaron Jones, Zeke Elliott went rounds later, so you got to have some faith that he's going to come in and really produce at that top 12 level as a rookie. So it depends. If you really feel strongly about him, that's a good spot. Some people are a little iffy on rookies, so seeing the first one to come off the board right there in the 3rd is it's enough to talk about.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I've equated, Bryce Hall is getting mad comparisons to Jonathan Taylor, but I will say I took Jonathan Taylor in the 3rd round his rookie year and caught shit for it. And by the end of that season, I came out on top with that. So I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm not saying Kevin's right. It's interesting, and it's interesting in an interesting sort of way, not good or bad. Austin, did any picks stand out to you?
Yeah, and it's kind of a question I have for Nate. So the one IDP player I had my eye on coming into this and knew about was Foye Oluokun, who Cal King ended up taking. He was the number 2 linebacker in IDP last year, and he ended up going as the 9th linebacker. And I know some of that is because like the TJ Watts and the Micah Parsons, they have that dual position option. So they obviously get pushed up a bit in ADP, but getting him in the 10th round, I'm curious, Nate, from your experience, do you expect regression with him? Do you think that's a good value there? What's your take?
So Oluokun, he was the number one tackler last year for linebackers. Yeah, by a lot. He was also on Atlanta and has now moved to Jacksonville. So I think there's some volatility there. I think there are people that, are on both sides of, maybe there's some regression. He's not going to be able to keep up that amount of tackles. He's definitely not going to be able to, I don't think he's going to be able to exceed. So he's not moving up from the number one spot at tackles, and he put in a lot of tackles. So I think expecting some regression, expecting the change of scenery to have an effect is something that I think contributed to him kind of dropping. And that's when, you look at guys like Roquan Smith, Devin White, Darius Leonard, these guys that are consistent every year. Oluokun kind of came up, peaked, and what is he going to do? Whereas Roquan Smith is very much like he's going to be a top 5 guy. So that's really where your levels are. You want to look at your values. Excuse me. You want to look at consistency over multiple years, whereas you don't want to just grab the hot hand from last year.
I absolutely love it. So if this is your first time tuning in, I have a little segment I like to do that I call the oops of the draft. And it's all in good fun. It's just mistakes that I think got made. And this is purely based on my opinion, but it's my show, so I get to do whatever the hell I want to do. So there are 2 oops of the draft, and one of them, everybody already knows what's coming. Kevin can't just let me have one draft where Cole Kmet doesn't get drafted. I hate Cole Kmet. I don't think he's a sleeper. I want to be perfectly fair and hilarious here. Where he went in this draft is a fine time to take Cole Kmet. If you believe the targets are going to be there, he would be a steal at this price. I don't, but I was just hoping not to have to talk about him 1 week. Thanks, Kevin. But my real oops of the draft, I am going to pick specifically on Nate. You're here with me. Joel, you're a friend of mine, but you let my guy Zach get Dalton Schultz in the 7th round after you had both taken TJ Hawkinson and Pat Freiermuth. Schultz has recently moved up to my tight end 3. I think he repeats and maybe even exceeds what he did last year. This is why I love tight end. Seeing Schultz fall to the 7th round, I would not take Hawkinson. And Nate, I know you're a Lions fan, but you're not even the one who took Hawkinson. And I certainly wouldn't take Freiermuth over Dalton Schultz, but that's just me, and that's what this whole segment is about. So Dalton Schultz in the 7th round, I think, is an absolute steal. The oops is on everybody who didn't take him, specifically Joel and Nate, but that's all in good fun, and that is the end of the show. Boys, I appreciate everything you guys have done. I thought this was a great first show for me just running this thing. Austin, you crushed it, but more importantly, Nate, let the people again know what you're working on, where they can find you. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. And I know that we had plans to do this a lot earlier in the year, and then some stuff came up on my end. So thank you for working with me and still getting me onto the show. Especially we were able to get another show in on a different topic way back then. So I enjoy being involved with you guys and doing these shows. It's really great fun. And, the collaboration we've been doing between IDP guys and Club Fantasy, absolutely amazing. Looking forward for more. But for people that want to find more of my stuff, follow me on Twitter at Nate Cheat. I am the founder and one of the owners of idpguys.org. We will be at the Fantasy Expo. We have a booth there. We will be part of the IDP panel with Fantasy and Frames. Gary Davenport will be there. Mike Wallert and Dynasty Pros are all involved with that. So if you're going to the expo, definitely check out that breakout session or panel discussion. I don't know what Bob calls them, all different things. So so definitely come and see that. We're gonna have a great time there. And then check out contentdesigncoach.com when that releases. Definitely check it out on YouTube. Please subscribe. As far as being able to get notifications when I do start sending out those videos. I have one more trailer coming out. I have to put together with the Ken Moody interview, and then I will start working on putting the shows together and getting those released. So, content design coach, definitely follow me, reach out to me. Like if you have questions now, I'm available. My DMs are open. And whether it's directly DMing me or hitting me up on, through a Twitter message, I'm around. So, that is I also am doing the Avi makers for Scott Fishbowl, and if you are in it, make sure that you get your Avi maker. Actually, it's today. The cutoff is before I go to bed today. I have to turn off the site.
It depends on how tired he is, so you better get a hold of him quick. Austin, any last words for the people? What are you working on right now?
Yeah, again, you could just find me on Twitter and Instagram at Austin_FFL. The easiest way to find everything I'm doing is to go to my page and click on my link tree. It's where I keep all of my articles. I do a podcast for Formula One called F1 Force. Love any subscriptions to that. And yeah, keep catching all of my fantasy football content at Club Fantasy. And I'll be here every Monday through the rest of the summer at 11 a.m.
Perfect. So if you're not following us, you should probably hit that subscribe button right now. Number one, we appreciate it. Number two, you'll be entered into drawings. Our founder, Josh Hudson, has spent way too much money on autographed merch, and every time we hit subscriber milestones, he gives it away to people. So you want to be a part of that giveaway. You're entered every single time. Go ahead and hit that sub button. It's also going to get you notifications. Every Wednesday, we do a show, 52 weeks a year. Right now, we are doing what's called our Look Inside series, where we break down 3 teams pretty well in depth, but we have a lot of fun with it, and we shit talk Cole Kmet every week. We do that every Wednesday at 7 p.m. Eastern. Last week, we had Michelle Majuk on from NFL Media and Ball Blast Football. We were covering Philly, Pittsburgh, and New England. This week, we are going to probably, I haven't got a full confirmation, but I'm going to say it. We're going to have our own writer, Kira Wojtrowski, on the show, and we're covering the Las Vegas Raiders, the Arizona Cardinals, and the Dallas Cowboys. Kira's a big Eagles fan, so is Josh. So I'm absolutely sure we're going to have fun just picking on the Cowboys and my projections of the Cowboys. To go along with that Look Inside series, we've now covered 21 player spotlights on our website, clubfantasyffl.com. Austin, you've done 2. You want to go ahead and pitch those real quick?
Yeah, sure. I've actually done 3. I did one.
You've done
Kyle
3.
Pitts.
That's how horrible I am. But yeah, so you've done 2 recently. You did Pitts very early on. So.
Yeah, Kyle Pitts happened very early on because the Falcons were garbage last year, like they will be this year. And I can say that because they're my favorite team. But basically talked about the history of first to second year tight end jumps and what we might expect from Kyle Pitts this year, particularly with the touchdown regression that he hopefully experiences. I did one recently on Naji Harris, built my case for him being the running back 1 this season. And then a couple of weeks back, did one on Tua Tagovailoa. I have to take a breath before it to make sure I get it right.
I just say it very fast to get it out.
And basically make the case that we should take a more balanced opinion on him. He's one of the more contentious players on fantasy Twitter and just NFL Twitter in general. And, there's a mixture of things working against him. And I think he has the upside to be at least a backup quarterback in fantasy leagues, if not a low end QB1. And so check out my reasoning there at clubfantasy.com. I also have a link in my link tree that just has all of my Club Fantasy articles. So you can click that and see everything I've written with Club Fantasy so far.
Perfect. So yeah, you can check out Austin's Kyle Pitts, Tua Tagovailoa, Naji Harris articles, as well as 18 other players. And our Josh Jacobs article written by Josh Hudson is going to drop in about an hour now. This show, as always, will be back next Monday. And we stuck with IDP, guys. Nate Brandon Hay is going to be coming on with us. But We're going to jump back into just a regular redraft. But in honor of Scott Fish and in honor of talking strategy, I am going to throw in a 3rd round reversal so we can talk about how that affects picking your draft slot and how that affects the draft in general. So thank you all so much for joining us. Thanks to everybody who participated in the draft. We'll be back next week. Go ahead and hit that subscribe button. Have a good one.